Hello, everyone, and welcome to the B&H Virtual Event Space. Today, we're welcoming back Peter Lee for part two of Travel Photography, Versatility, and Storytelling. We've also got Joey Pulsino joining from Canon. He'll be addressing any questions you may have in the YouTube chat as user Vision M Auto. Last time, Peter, one thing that I really picked up on was the letter L. You know, if we're going to take it sort of a Sesame Street route in your presentation, there was location scouting, landmarks, local attractions were what really stuck out to me. So I'd really like to see how this part two gets into a deeper dive.
Okay, thank you, Fred.
All right.
So let
With that,
me
I'll get out of the way.
let me actually share my screen. So this should actually do. If it looks wrong, you gotta let me know. My name is Peter Lee. I'm a technical representative from Canon, educator. I'm at home, as you can see, in California, so it's just past noon now. And this is part two of travel photography, or how I see it. And at the beginning, I always like to say it's like, well, at some point, I travel with lots of gear, and it's just I'm fortunate to have a lot of sample gear from Canon, and then you just use what you really want to at the time. And so right now you using some new stuff, but I always want to do just a super quick review because oftentimes people ask, especially when they think about travel photography, a lot of people do think about something maybe more compact. And the good thing with mirrorless now is that the bodies themselves. Now, lenses can be big, but the bodies themselves can be quite a bit smaller if you want. So this is a pretty classic comparison. I kept it the same. So many people will be familiar with like 5D sized bodies, in this case, a 5D4. And then I'm comparing the size and weight to a modern mirrorless body. So it's a relatively more compact, less expensive body, an R8. But for travel photography, if you're interested and or need something smaller, lighter, but still full frame, it's a serious consideration because it's a very modern camera. It just happens to be way, way smaller. And on the crop side, I thought I'd make a more fair comparison, and that is old school Canon DSLR that was known to be very small, and SL3 Rebel, and then comparing with something very modern. So the R50 is even smaller than that. It's a little bit tinier, a little bit smaller. And these are always things to think about. But in the end, I would always encourage people, you have to bring what works for you. And for some people, they're comfortable with bigger gear or they have to bring bigger gear. And that's what you need for certain things. But sometimes it's going to be more casual. Totally understand that, especially for working photographers who carry lots of stuff anyways for work. You might want to travel lighter. So totally understand that. This is the thing I didn't talk about last time. So much of my pictures are going to be from sticks, so from tripod. If you're traveling and you need to bring a tripod, then we start to thinking about different things. So usually weight. So carbon fiber normally, just because it's just straight lighter. It is more expensive, but it's straight lighter. And it's something that's not just sitting in a studio space all the time. Doesn't matter. You don't need carbon fiber for that. Something what I think about in terms of what tripod I might bring would be how long does it need to be when I pack it? So can I carry it in a roller bag in a carry-on, which is possible with something like this, or does it need to be a bigger tripod? Then it needs to go into check luggage, and that usually comes down to the number of leg segments. So the more segments you have, of course, the shorter it'll kind of squeeze down into. But then you give up a little bit of stability. So it's always a trade-off with that. And the same thing with heads. So the bigger, heavier heads are more stable. They work better with long glass, but they're going to be bigger, bulkier, and substantially heavier. So usually if I'm using a wider lens, I'll pack a lighter head because I don't need a heavy duty head if I'm using a fairly short focal length lens. And then, of course, the last thing always you have to think about is how tall are you and how tall can you make the tripod? So in this case, I'm showing you an example where you have a center column that can be raised. And that's the last thing you'll want to do. But if you have to, you have to. And sometimes you have to have a setup where the legs only go so long because I need a shorter tripod that I can pack when I travel. but I'm a relatively tall person. And so you should not be uncomfortable if you're using a tripod regularly. And it's like hunching down. That's kind of ridiculous. And then sometimes, especially a number of you, I suspect, would be interested in landscape photography. Now you might need a taller tripod because you're standing on a downslope, and the tripod will be below your feet. You need an extra tall tripod. So always things to think about. This is the kind of modern tool. So for those of you still on DSLR and then you've not been doing as much research, then I should explain. So a bunch of modern mirrorless cameras that are more expensive. I've given you not the complete list because the new R1 and R5 Mark II, which they've been announced now, so I can actually talk about it. Those also have in-body image stabilization. The sensor can be moved around to suppress camera shake. So it is a tool that can be useful. So it's not a completely substitute for traditional tripod, very long exposures, but it could be something that it's like, hey, I know I want to use a somewhat longer exposure. It's not 10 seconds, it's not 15 seconds, it's not 30 seconds, but I'm a bit lazy about breaking out a tripod, or maybe I don't want to bring it today on my trip. So this is another tool where like I can have elongated shutter time, handheld, and get reliably sharp pictures without necessarily breaking out a tripod all the time. Okay. And then of course, flying. This is always a common question. So I fly a lot. I used to fly a lot, like huge amount, like basically almost every week. Back in the day, like every other week nowadays. So you always get questions about how do you actually bring your gear? A very common question I get. So I personally don't like to check gear. That's just my kind of thing. I know some coworkers that actually do, they bring enough gear that they'll check gear because they're bringing pretty substantial kits sometimes. I personally don't favor that. So as a kind of regular customer, I would personally not choose to do that. It's up to you. I think the thing I would always recommend would be to know what kind of airplane you're on. So I'm a total airplane geek. If you're not as much, I would always just look up on your airplane ticket. It'll give you some idea roughly of what airplane it should be, or if they have to swap it out, they have to swap it out something similar sized anyways. So get to know what kind of bins they have if you plan to carry on things. And then if you happen to go on to a very small airplane, just know that you might have to do some kind of gate checking, which you hand on off a bag that normally is a roller that you put into a bin yourself on a bigger airplane. But if you happen to be on a smaller, like a regional airplane, oftentimes the bins are too small. And then you'll be asked to gate check and give you a little tag, you retrieve it. Just you have to know that. Um, my recommendation is if you have a bigger lens, I would tend to suggest not packing it mounted on a camera body. So it's not ever happened to me, but I have heard of circumstances where people have broken off, especially longer super telephoto glass, because it's a big lever now. I think you can see where this is going. So if you mount a very physically long lens onto a camera body, and the airplane experiences substantial turbulence, even on carry-on luggage. I'm not talking about check luggage now, just regular carry-on. Uh, you could have a lot of pressure on the mount, and all lenses are engineered to break at the mount to save the rest of the lens. So it's the design weak point of all lenses. So generally, I don't approach it that way. Just pack it separate. You put it together when you get to your destination. Pretty straightforward. And then always batteries. Batteries cannot be in checked luggage. So especially in a gate check situation, remember to retrieve batteries. So it is a big deal in terms of flight safety. I promised you I'd show you other things. So last time, I think I stopped at just regional San Francisco Bay. I kind of moving forward. So this is pretty famous location. Less common weather, but better weather, of course, for landscape photography is bad weather. Bad weather makes for interesting landscapes. Good weather makes things fairly boring. So this is winter weather in Yosemite. So this is classic tunnel view. It's kind of local term for it. Expedition Point is the official term for it. It is the kind of the tour bus stop point. So if you stay there long enough, I'm sure most of the season, except for the dead of winter, you'll get tour buses letting a bunch of tourists off at a time, and it gets flooded out, and then get back on the bus, and it empties out, and only the local visiting photographers are left to take pictures again. Classic view. Been there many times. I think the thing about general, I would say general landscape photography is often this is my default lens, kind of. So I'll bring a 24 to 70, 24 105, something like that. As the default lens, if I only have one lens for landscape, it makes sense. It gives you a lot of flexibility. I think the thing people often forget about using, especially to a location that they've been to more than once. So I get the bucket list shot. So yeah, I know the shot's been taken millions of times. So literally at tunnel view, millions and millions of similar pictures have been taken. Break out a longer lens. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's always lots of different types of compositions. This is a longer lens, and I happened to be at 200 millimeter. I'll tell you exactly the focal length it was. It was 200 millimeter. It was the same day as the other shot, so it's just a little bit later. And I'm just working two cameras at once. That's fine. This is what tripods are really useful for now. Is one camera's on a tripod, and then another camera can be handheld in this circumstance. I'm not going to break out two tripods for this, but it just you can easily isolate much smaller parts of the scene. And then that's El Capitan on the right, obviously, with long lens. And this is oftentimes, yeah, I don't see it nearly as much as I really should, especially at more frequented locations. So anytime a location is more common, where it's like it's not far from a parking spot, it's going to automatically make it more common in Yosemite because it's an easy walk. It's not a big hike. Then I would always suggest bringing some different lenses. So usually longer lenses because they'll be less commonly used. Still at Yosemite, this tree is still up as far as I know. I've not been back since pre-COVID now, but tree in a meadow. So it's a classic tree picture, sunrise. And because there are some mountains in the background, sunrise doesn't need to be crazy early for fall colors. So this will be it's like 8 a.m., something like that. So not too bad. So not obnoxiously early. A classic picture, especially if you, so this case, because it's Yosemite, it's still, even though it's kind of in the valley, it's kind of that normal kind of California winter feel, which is it's cold enough and then just humid enough. A lot of mornings will be a bit foggy, which could make it extra interesting. If you want things like sunstars, so you see a sunstar here, anytime you want that, you just have to stop down more. So quite a bit. So this was probably F16. It's a classic way of stopping down, and then you'll get the burst. Less common location, so it's still along the Merced River because that's the whole point of Yosemite Valley. The geology of it is the Merced River's kind of cut itself through the rock over many millions of years. And then if you walk along the banks at some point, so this one's a bit cheaty because technically it's actually not too far from parking lot. I'm not going to tell you exactly where it is. I'll make it discovered on your own. But if you keep walking, you'll get lots of different types of compositions, and that's a good thing. So this one just happened to be rain. So I remember this one was actually raining on me. You just don't see rain droplets just because I'm using a neutral density filter, so it's a very long exposure. And that's also why the river water, even though it's not really running strong in this image of spring, it's gonna give you that cloudy looking reflection, which can be quite interesting. You can definitely get that with rain. You just got to go with a longer exposure. Just a different point of view of a very famous half dome. This one is easier to get in the fall. So this is the local term for it would be in Yosemite would be valley view. So expedition point or tunnel view is actually behind and far higher. So it's literally behind and up. This is right along the Merced River. In this case, for me, it was standing right in the middle of the Merced River. So I would always caution, just be very careful when you're walking on river rocks, even if it hasn't been raining, and it wasn't raining this day. The rocks themselves will be slippery, almost certainly slippery. So just be very careful anytime you're doing that. The reason I actually didn't want to be in the middle of the river in this one, just because it is more dangerous. You don't want to necessarily be there unless you have to. But it just came down to a lot of situations where sometimes you see it. A lot of the really I would describe it as bucket list pictures. If you spend the effort to go there, you might as well get a bucket list picture. I would do the same thing, even if I didn't live like 3 hours away. If I lived much farther away, I had to get on a plane, I would still go and get the bucket list picture, of course. I would encourage you to just do that, just so you see it, you experience it, you have a picture of your own. There happened to be a tourist photographer that had kind of camped out and was rather unwilling to move on the left. I'll just put it that way. And so a bit frustrating for people because if people don't move, it makes it used to be it made it quite a bit more effort in Photoshop to remove them if you wanted to. So that's how I ended up doing a little rock hopscotching into the middle of the river. Macro is always fun because it gives you a viewpoint of the world, especially detail and texture that otherwise you would not see so readily with your own eyes, with your own human vision. Your brain just doesn't envision it, but it's there if you use a macro lens. It's just a tree trunk, so along our trail in Yosemite. So it's all over the place. You just have to look. Yosemite's quite dark. If you do plan on going there for photography reasons, do not go now because it's super crowded. So generally, for those really interested in traveling there, for the reason is I want to take actually good pictures. I would encourage spring if you prefer waterfalls, running strong, and then fall if you're looking for fall colors. Fall colors are always a little bit tricky because it's hard to tell sometimes which time of year. So within a few weeks, give or take, yes, somewhere around there. But it's also dark. So Yosemite Valley is quite dark. You're far away from light pollution from big cities, from big metro areas. So it's quite easy to generate Milky Way photos as well. Just look up. You have to stay up late now, but look up. It's quite dark. If you plan on it, just bring usually, if you're not bringing a tracking mount, then bring a wider lens that has a fairly large aperture and a tripod. You don't want to be using something like IBIS for this. Moving forward, so this is past Yosemite now, but this is along Big Sur. So Big Sur, this is Bixby Bridge. So it is a kind of FDR, so 1930s area construction public works project. So it's along Pacific Coast Highway 1. There are a number of bridges. This happens to just be the most famous one. The first time I went there, I'm trying to remember, how did I scout it? So I just used kind of online tools now. So nothing really different. So just Google Maps still was there. And so it was less, I would say less sophisticated back then. And you still had like a basics kind of a street view built out. So you kept some idea of what it looked like. Um, but this is the kind of the classic look if you're looking out towards the ocean. The day I was there, this time when I took this picture, it was intentional that I brought a tilt shift lens. And it actually came in handy. You don't have to. Anytime you don't bring a tilt shift lens and you need to straighten things out, you will eventually have to crop your image without getting into super, fancy detail about it. You will lose sections of your image. So if you need to actually go take this image, but without tilt shift and you want everything straight, then shoot wider than you need. You have to bring a lens wider than 24 millimeter on a full frame from this shooting position. And then you'll be cropping some stuff out and then just transforming and moving things around a little bit to straighten things out. But that would be classic. There's just a big marine layer. A big enough marine layer that when the sun was setting on the Pacific Ocean off in the distance to the west, did not get much of the inner cloud dazzling colors for a few minutes. So waiting for that just didn't happen. So it just happens like that sometimes along the ocean. This is very cool. And this is the only time of day I could get there doing a workshop. So doing a workshop at this location many years ago. And the way our day was planned out, we could not get here except in the middle of the afternoon. So it is what it is sometimes with that. And it's McElway Falls. So this is a good ways south of even Bixby. So it's a little ways south of Bixby. It's a good ways south of Monterey and Carmel. So along Big Sur. And it's one of the few waterfalls I know of that empties into Pacific Ocean. So the blue you see is actually Pacific Ocean, which is really cool. The location I'm at was super, super touristy because it was summer and it was the middle afternoon. So of course it's crazy touristy. And then the platform I was standing on was a kind of a wooden walkway, extremely unstable. So you just have to monitor things because it's very difficult not to get camera shake, even on a tripod. Just someone walking around a nearby would generate camera shake. So it is one of those super touristy things. And then long lens. So always have some option. This is what I always suggest. If you are going to try for some of these bucket list shots, always have some option to have a longer lens to literally photograph around people without having to get rid of them. I know that there are much more fancy tools now to get rid of people, but my own preference is to not use them if I can avoid it at all. I will not use those tools. So just in this case, a very long lens to get around people. Big Sur is rocky. So this is not like Southern California. So in Northern California, all the way up the coast of Oregon and then Washington State, you basically have some variety of this. You're going to have lots of rock, not actually that much beach, like sandy beach, lots and lots of rock. And so, as always, just find what you like in terms of foreground, and then pray that the weather is cooperative. If it's going to be sunset, because it's Pacific Coast. If you want a nice looking, colorful sky, it's going to have to be probably sunset realistically. And just hopefully, yeah, it looks good. So pretty good this day. Not far from that location. So this is just off of Pacific Coast Highway. These things, the previous shot was off a trail not too far. This one is way off a trail. So these are just wild calla lilies. A little bit hard to find sometimes. If you're very good with flowers, then you kind of know where to look in terms of the kind of environment that they like to live and thrive in and grow on their own. But sometimes you just have to walk around to find it and just have to explore, go off trail basically. This is a Mono Lake. So geographically, Mono Lake is not too far. You go out the eastern entrance of Yosemite. So not many people do it this way, but you drive all the way from the west. People go to Yosemite usually from the west because they fly in somewhere on the west coast. You're going to go in the west entrance. If you drive all the way out the east entrance and you keep going, at some point you will get to Mono Lake. And so it's an old salt lake that's been isolated from the rest of the ocean water and super dark. So, and they've got these kind of these outcroppings that are left over basically from being a salt sea that's slowly losing water over many thousands of years. Super, super dark. This has become super popular location for literally right now. We're coming right up to Perseids. So this was taken during Perseids many years ago now. So it's August. It's the strongest meteor shower annually that we'll see, just because of the way the Earth is revolving around the sun. It's a good time for that. Looking south, the exact location I take this picture from is currently not really accessible. So because of all of the heavy winter rains. So last winter, the rain in California was average. In this location, it would have been somewhat average. But there have been a number of years within the past 5 years. I mean, I think at least two, if not 3 years out of the last 5 years, winter rains have been very strong. And then the lake is actually filled up, which means that this place, which was used to be on dry land, very close to lake water, is now completely submerged. I think, chest deep, which would be very uncomfortable. You don't want to do that. Okay. And then other cities, of course. I think this is the original program I made was about, it's like, what can you do at home? Because it's home. It's like you're gonna think it's boring. It's home. I'm home all the time, and then it's like I've been to these locations all the time since maybe, especially if you grew up in the same city. Since I was a kid, I've been to these locations. What new can I do? And then now the point is like, well, if you can travel, wouldn't you like to go to places where you can take pictures of fun things? So I had to pull up a bunch of Chicago pictures I've taken over the years. This one is pretty. So this is my favorite Chicago skyline. You cannot get the whole skyline from it, but you get enough of it and you've got a much better foreground. The only other good skyline pictures, you have to be more out in Lake Michigan. It's not my favorite. I just don't like it as much because your foreground is not as strong. So you really don't have a foreground to work with. You just have basically the skyline, which is fine. So some cities will just be like that. You have to deal with it. But that's one of my always my personal bucket list things is if I'm visiting a new city, I'll try to get the classic skyline picture. And it's for some cities, it might be more than one location you can go to. So Chicago is one of those. So this is my favorite location. So it's got the fountain in the foreground. So when I scouted it, so this one I scouted. So ahead of time, but I knew it was in a park. It's in this exact park. But because it's green space, you kind of have to figure out. It's like, yeah. So I put the red dot there. So somewhere around there. So always the big thing is finding parking. So I got there just before the park closed. So even back in the day when I first went there, if it got late enough, I'm pretty sure security folks at the park basically go find you and shoot you out. I think how late did it go? I think 11 was 11 p.m. or midnight, something like that. So it's been a while since I've been here. So it's this kind of picture. And because this lens was brand new, so this must have been, this has been 2019 at some point, maybe early 2019. I went there. I brought this lens specifically because I wanted to use it as a travel lens. I think this is one of the first pictures I actually took with this lens. It's like, well, it's like I imagine a lot of people might be interested in travel because it's a 10 times zoom, starting at 24 millimeter for full frame. Why not just try it out and see how it works? Not bad. So not bad. So 20, this was at 24 millimeter. Personally, would I've liked to have been possibly a little bit wider? Kind of, yeah, only because I couldn't back up more. This is the kind of the composition I wanted. I actually want it a little bit wider if I could. So, but yeah, it is what it is sometimes. And that's sometimes a limitation of some of these big zoom lenses is that you can only go so wide if you need to be so long at the same time. So this one, there are people milling about. It is what it is. So you're gonna get that sometimes. And then I had to cut my shadow out of it. It's just because of that was the lighting at the location. There's a street lamp directly behind me. There's a shadow on the ground. So crop that sucker out. So I don't want to even deal with that thing. A classic skyline picture with I would describe it as a more common travel type lens. This is much more recent. This is actually after COVID. So I've been back to Chicago a few times in the past few years for work. Uh, Different lens, modern, kind of a modern lens. Kind of. This is Navy Pier. So long walk. So long walk because I can wake up super early in the morning before work and then walk around. Personally, architecture is one of my favorite things. And Chicago's clearly, not just worldwide and not just America, but anywhere in the world, it'd be one of my favorite kind of architecture photography locations you can go to. It'd be definitely Chicago. And this one, just early enough, I don't have to get rid of people. So literally, I think I was the only photographer out there. There's no one else out there except for like maintenance and cleanup crew from the previous night. I think there was some fireworks thing. I went there the previous night and there was some with a group of people and it was super busy and there were fireworks. I forget what it was, whether there's something about local basketball team or something. Not the Bulls. I think it's the women's team. And then I went back, it's like, maybe I can get better compositions without a bazillion people milling around. So always easy thing to do is go out in the morning because not many people are want to wake up that early. Let's be realistic. So morning makes for an easy opportunity not to have to get rid of people. So classic morning picture. This one years ago, but because I loved architecture so much, this is I'll tell you the building. It's very famous. So this is Rookery. So this is downtown Chicago financial district. To get this is actually a very classic shot. So many pictures like this have been taken, and I had a tripod on me, but for some reason I didn't want to really set it up. It kind of scared me because you have to buy a tour ticket to actually walk in a location to get this picture in Rookery. So if you don't buy the ticket, you can be there's like kind of a lobby location, and then you can't get into the stairwell to actually look up in the classic circular stairwell to get this picture. I think I didn't use a tripod because I was just trying to work fast, and then I didn't use fancy gear at all. So it was a crop. I remember crop DSLR, and I was using the kit lens with it. Pretty straightforward, nothing fancy at all. But the history behind it, the building was very cool. The tour guide really knew their architecture well and knew the history about the building really well. So just because I love architecture, I wanted to see the building. It was super famous for architecture reasons. And it's very close to the Exchange, if I remember right. So it's right down there, downtown Thailand in the Financial Exchange district. This one is more recent. So this is just off of Millennium Park. It's one of the, I think a cultural museum, something like that. I don't know. I was there for work, but I was also because I was not staying too far away. I was staying downtown that time. I noticed there's interest this sort of thing. So I always love skylights. So this is stained glass rotunda. So skylight, very very cool. And then it was just I just found it interesting because for work purposes, the type of photography that was happening at this location, I can tell you right now, was portraiture. So I just found it very ironic that people were not looking up. So I get it. So it'd be very difficult because this is the ceiling. It'd be very difficult to do any kind of traditional or untraditional portraiture where you can get this as part of the background. So I totally get that. But I just thought it was personally amusing that people that were their primary interest was learning more about, it's like, hey, I want to become a better portrait photographer. We're completely oblivious to really good architecture photography, like right around me. I just found it very funny. But classic picture, that was HDR. So it's just a multi-exposure bracket. Moving on, there are lots more pictures, but I got to get to some other cities now. Kansas City, so that's the splash picture you saw. This one was really challenging. So this literally was the first time I used the RF 240. This is all the way back in 2019 when it came out. I was using it as much as possible when traveling. I wanted the classic um, city skyline picture of Kansas City, Missouri. And I knew right away I had to be in a park, but somewhere in a park. Very challenging when it's big green space, just because all these kind of virtual tools you can use to scout ahead of time at a remote location, they don't work so well in big green space. And the problem with this geographic, I could already see from a topological map that of the park itself, it was hilly. And then you never know what other obstructions, meaning trees and or buildings, that can get in your way of a composition. And I'd rather not spend the effort in Photoshop to remove it later on. So I just rather not have the picture, have that to start. So this one was quite difficult. So it required a good chunk of walking around. I ended up not having to use like a fancy lens. This is the lens I took this picture with. I didn't have to use some obnoxious focal length, like either on the super long side. You never know though. So sometimes it's like, oh, if I have to stand, I might have to stand really far away because I'm shooting between trees and all these things. I might have to use actually a very long focal length. Didn't have to here. You just have to walk around. It's because the actual location you take this picture from is not a sidewalk. It's not a street. It's not anywhere along that. It is literally in the middle of the park in order to get something like this. But get lots of shots like this if you get to the right spot. I think the key with it compositionally, you can see where it is right away. The key to me on always on this type of picture is where you stick a flagpole. So there is a American flagpole right in the front because it's on the grounds of the park itself. It's a World War I memorial park, actually in Kansas City. And then depending on exactly the area you stand in, you can move that sucker around quite a bit. So I was out there to eventually I did my tour of Kansas on this trip, basically. So doing a tour of Kansas means you fly into Kansas City, and then I drove basically a good chunk of the state, apparently. So this is Topeka. So anytime you do hot air balloon, I think I talked about it a little bit last time. So hot air balloons they're easy. They're local events, and it's one of the most common uses. If you don't want to carry two camera bodies, then it's one of the most common reasons to use some kind of super zoom. So you can get wide. So 24 millimeter on a full frame is fairly wide. And sometimes that's quite useful, especially if you're a little bit closer like this. I'm not using 24 millimeter here, clearly, but you can also have without swapping lenses or without swapping camera bodies, which is quite handy again. Hot air ballooning events, you can have something very long. So it just comes in super handy. So it is one of those things where it becomes very useful. So this is just like it was an evening kind of light up event during the evening. So this was not sunrise. I'm sure this was sunset. I have to look at the timestamp on the metadata, but I'm pretty sure this one was sunset. Lots of fun shapes and colors you can play with. It's a very natural venue for photography. State Capitol. Again, it is one of my bucket list things to do is always all the fun rotundas from all the state capitals I can get to. They just spent a ton of money here. Apparently, a little bit of a local controversy that they spent so much money on the refurbishment of the state capitol, but very pretty. So it's one of those very pretty things. I brought a bunch of shorter, wider lenses, shorter focal length lenses, wider. You never know which one you might want to use. Plenty wide enough on a full frame. So usually 16 on a full frame is plenty wide. Yeah, if you do this a lot, you kind of know that already. But usually it's not too bad. Very classic. I promise. I promise Derek. So you might be able to see this later. Lots of New York pictures. I'll run through them. So this is from the 3 hour boat tour. So it's the boat tour that starts on the west side. I think it's not too far. Yeah, it's not too far from Intrepid, I think. I forget where you actually get onto the sucker, but it's on the west side, Midtown, somewhere in the west. And then you can either take the whole thing around Manhattan Island. I think that's roughly 6 hours, give or take, or you take the halfway and then you come back. So this is the halfway and then you come back. And it's a classic way to get a little bit closer to Ellis Island and Statue of Liberty. Otherwise, a little bit more challenging, clearly, because you have to be using long glass from New Jersey, something very far away now. So much better. The best shots historically are a lot of aerial shots for obvious reasons, but boat, the only thing about a boat is unless you rented it out, you can't tell the person where to drive. So always handy to bring zoom and a zoom that goes a little bit further out. So you don't have to crop too much if you don't have to. But classic postcard picture, of course. This one was just a power shot. This is not even an interchangeable lens camera. Same boat tour. So I've only done this once ever. And this is pretty obvious, the location of what it is. Classic, I would describe it as point of interest. Um, to me, in the United States, sorry to say, but New York would be the other really, not my favorite. Chicago's probably my personal favorite, but New York would be my second favorite place for architecture because there's lots of cool architecture. Classic picture on tour. Boat pictures challenging depending on sea state. So sea state here was not horrible, but it was a little bit choppy, and technically it was actually raining on me. And then if a wave was big enough, even on the tour boat, you get splashed quite a bit. So it's cold, windy, and it's raining. And because this was October, years ago, October in New York, doing this type of picture. And this one west side, but from an elevated point of view, I only had access to because there was a work event in this space. So the space itself had been rented out for a working event. So I had access to this. I think, did I bring my tripod? I must have brought my tripod because I knew I had an elevated shooting position. And then I forget the road. It's the big road on the west side going along the the water. I forget. I have no idea about the names of all the roads. But you get just obviously pointing south towards downtown. And then this is always, again, just different points of view. Sometimes it can be challenging. You need to be in a tall enough building, especially with New York City having so many very tall skyscrapers. You need to be in a tall enough building to look in a certain direction without being obscured, which is sometimes not so easy. So if your building's only 40 stories and you get up that building for certain angles, if you look certain directions, you won't have much of a view just because there's a taller building very close. Can't see it very much. So it's always, in this case, nothing super fancy. But I would choose to usually bring a longer lens. I had different shots of the ground level. I didn't like them. So that's all I remember from this one. This one is just I wasn't planning on taking pictures at all. So I was just walking to Javits Center for work when they used to have Photo Plus at Javits Center long ago. And then just, yeah, you get there and you see some interesting light, and especially an interesting building. You get some interesting light in the morning. Why not take a snapshot with just a point and shoot? I mean, that's all I have on me. I'd rather use that other than a phone. So pretty straightforward. Nothing fancy about it. The shape alone tells you what it is. So that was my preferred composition here. So it's all about light. This had a whole bunch of pictures. So from New York City, just walking along the street, just bringing, in this case, a real camera with a longer lens. You get lots of opportunities to do abstract because there's so many tall buildings that have perhaps something interesting going on in the facade. It's very easy to generate lots of images like this. There'll be reflections. Sometimes they can be helpful. Sometimes they can be distracting. This one's not too bad. I just found the structure to be interesting. I don't remember what building this is. So usually I try really hard to remember where I was. and what building it was so I can name. I'll go back and name the picture so I remember. I literally don't remember where this one was, but it's along a walk somewhere if you're closer to Times Square, between Times Square and Javits Center, because this is along the way I would take to work normally. And sometimes I would bring a better camera in case I wanted to make an effort to take more pictures along the way in the morning. I think it's closer to that new development they finished. Let's put it that way. Super famous building. So this is a Flatiron. This was an intentional walk in the morning with the proper gear. So this is all planned out. I think I borrowed this lens from my own booth because I didn't travel with the 24 millimeter tilt shift. I'm pretty sure I borrowed the Canon one that we had in the show booth from Photo Plus overnight. So I'll bring it back the next morning. That's pretty much what I did. Went there super early in the morning. Again, because this Photo Plus has to be October, so that's easy enough. Uh, at the right time in the morning, you could possibly get something like this. You should be able to get it in the fall. At the right time in the morning, you get a strip of light going right up the edge. Architecturally very famous building. And then I was just using a tilt shift lens, the tilt part of a tilt shift lens, which is not the normal thing. So mostly in architecture, you use the shift thing to straighten things out without having to boop, change things in software. But this is using the tilt portion to make the other things around the building to the left and right not sharp. So it makes it look quite interesting. And then this it's my favorite building in Manhattan. It's my favorite building in New York. It's one of my favorite buildings architecturally in the world, and that's Chrysler Building. Uh, I did this one before work, like super early. Had to convince a couple of coworkers. One of them wanted to go anyways. That's like one of them wanted to go on a photo walk anyways. I had to convince them. It's like we should walk all the way to Chrysler Building because I need to take some pictures while we're in New York. We're staying midtown somewhere. It's like we need to make the hike. So it's a good hike. And this is something you can always do. The best places to do it would be really big cities. New York is best to do this style of picture. And what I mean is to have a main subject seen in the reflection of a building across the street. And it is, you gotta find hopefully a building with more of a mirror window finish across the street. And it's best during a time of day where your star building, the building you actually want, is brighter. It's lit up brighter, which again is going to be a time of day thing. For me, this one was, I had to walk into the street a little bit. Always very dangerous. I think I literally had my coworkers watch me and ready to yell at me in case there was a naughty driver that was not being so nice. But this one's technically off the curb. Do be careful. I would say I wouldn't try this alone just because you're totally not paying attention to your environment because you're craning your neck. It's very uncomfortable. You do not want to get on the ground. That's more dangerous. So I would say if you want something like this, use buddy system and have someone go with you because you're not going to be able to get a good version of this unless you walk in the street a little bit. But look up. Anytime you have big cityscape with lots of skyscrapers, look up and take advantage of lots of reflections. Just be aware of them because they're all around you. This one I promised, just Derek asked me, it's like, show me some more New York pictures. I went back and I lazy, did not process this one. So this is it's a panel, but using a tilt shift and I'm not rotating around a nodal point. So I did the quick panel with just a tilt shift. So it's 3 shots from the same tilt shift, and I just stitched them together horizontally. Pretty straightforward. From Brooklyn. So the last time I was in New York, I was not on Manhattan Island. I was in Brooklyn, and this is a shot across the old piers that gone away. So only the structural support is left on the piers now, which of course people use this. It's a pretty classic shot, I would say, of Manhattan Island from Brooklyn, other than the Brooklyn Bridge shot, which I couldn't find that one. So I did not cheat and ask. That's like a super famous Instagram totally took that over as a super famous picture where you get the buildings and you get the bridge in the background and you can still see some of Manhattan Island in the background. Yeah, it's okay, super cool. Couldn't find that exact location. That's I hiked around for quite a bit. I was not too far away from that, but it was a different trip. Just hiking around the park. But for this one, pretty classic because it gives you lots of interesting foreground. and that's always interesting to play with. This one was morning, so I'm pretty sure I went before, like really early, before work, and I actually found parking, and the parking was not obnoxiously expensive, which surprised me actually. So I found regular street meter parking for this one. That's always a thing. So when I travel to faraway places, that's one of the biggest things. And it's like, where do I park to actually get there? It's like it's going to be definitely a thing. And this is going to be the inside of the Modern Art Museum inside Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's right along Lake Michigan. This is the inside. So I took this picture the first time I went there. It was winter. I remember it was winter because I was walking outside trying to take pictures with standard kind of wide lenses of architecture, and they all kind of sucked. They did all kind of suck. And then it's like I gave up after about like 2 hours plus of walking outside. It was freezing. So it literally was, I think it was like 40 degrees, but it was like gusting along Lake Michigan. It was super cold. So the wind chill was way below freezing. So I gave up after about a few hours and went outside. Went inside was warm. And then the inside architecture is interesting. And you get more stuff like this, basically. This is happenstance. They're not posing for me. They're just visiting the museum. Um, it's a good story to tell because I got to go back few months later for work. I got to go back to it. And this is the museum itself. It's actually very cool. That's what I wanted, something more like this because I couldn't find the composition. That's the only downside. If you really enjoy architecture, I do. So I clearly love architecture. That's the only downside of architecture is your subject is so large potentially. And if it sits on a larger inside a larger green space, so this museum actually does. It sits inside on its own, inside its own substantial green space. So this one, you actually, to take this picture is actually off property. So you're not actually even on the green space anymore to get this type of picture. It just took forever. I think when I went back, it was warmer weather. I think it was spring. I think it was like April or something in May. So it's actually, the weather was actually quite nice. And then I think it took me 3 hours of walking around before I found this type of location. So I think it was across the street and then on a walkway. So if you ever travel there, just kind of know it's like you have to be across the street, and all these street views will not help you to find this one. You just have to keep walking around until you find what looks good to your eye. The only reason I bought the 50 was I kind of knew all the wide shots sucked. So there's no point bringing a 24 tilt shift to 17 tilt shift. I could have. And it's like, no, this is stupid because all the compositions that are, I'm filling the frame up closer with a wider lens, I did not like any of them. So I did not like it. So I knew I had to probably back away a little bit to get a better shot. And then I think I'm gonna wrap up with Portland. So Multnomah. So Multnomah is tallest falls, I think falls in North America. I'm pretty sure. Again, this is going to be a bit of green space, but it's super touristy green space. And so because there's a parking lot right there, it's like really literally right there. And then there's a paved walking trail from the parking lot to a location where it's like literally a concrete platform where you take this picture. You literally cannot miss where to take this picture. It is one of those things because for a couple reasons. So Multnomah Falls is part of the Columbia River ecosystem. It is on the south side. So always a kind of a reminder when you take a picture of falls, anytime any waterfall, generally my suggestion is you want to avoid having sunlight hit it because you get very strong reflection clearly coming off of a waterfall. You generally don't want that. Because the waterfall is on the south side of the Columbia Gorge, um, and we're in the northern hemisphere, you take this picture in the morning if you don't want light hitting the fall. So doubly beneficial because you have fewer people walking across the pedestrian bridge. So right in the middle of the image, you see high up is a very elevated pedestrian bridge. And at busier times of day, just if people are just you can't get rid of them. They'll be all over the top of the walkway there. Um, I did this intentionally just to make the point. So I literally did a whole set of pictures the first time I was there, the normal bucket list shot, which you already saw, and then a bunch of stuff like this. So the thing I don't see often with waterfalls, especially ones that have a lot of flow, is doing tight shots with telephoto with really fast shutter speeds. Because you get basically water shapes and you take lots and lots of pictures because every moment will have a different shape, but even with the same general framing, the shape of the water will change moment to moment, depending on the flow, the chaos of the flow of the water itself. And it's something you can easily see with long lens. So quite nice. And then that's always a good story to lead to the prettiest waterfall I've ever been to. So it's Fairy Fall. It's very close to Multnomah. So I did the big red circles where Multnomah is. So it's literally one exit closer to Portland, like Metro. Because Multnomah Falls is not too far away from Portland Metro. Fairy Fall is actually even closer. I don't know its current state because it was closed from wildfire damage a number of years ago. There were substantial wildfires that approached Portland, actually. They were very close. So if you lived in Portland, you would have been exposed to lots of smoke. That was that one summer. And then this one is along a hiking trail. So that if you look on the hiking guide, it says it's the one I have that's not highlighted. So it's the Multnomah dash Wakina Loop hike. Um, Hiking guides call it moderate. I will say this. Hiking guides always understate the case of how difficult thing is because of their target audience. This is a rather substantial hike because you're going up quite a bit of elevation. So the next number on the right, you see nothing's listed on the columns. It's 4.9 miles, but it's you're lifting yourself up 1,600 feet within a few miles, about 2.5 miles, because not all of it is going to be climbing. So the portions you are climbing are super steep, and then part of it will involve switchbacks up a rock face. So you do have to be comfortable with heights. And then it is a substantial hike where you might want to minimize the amount of gear. I've done this hike more than a few times because I know I want to carry minimal gear. That's pretty straightforward because it's if you want to make good time and go a little bit faster, it's going to be a big workout at that point. So light and load. So all I carried was one camera, one lens, and one tripod, and that was it. That's it. You still want to carry a tripod. This image. So this one, it's always hard to tell. The tree trunk in the foreground may give you a little clue, but I'm not good. I'm not an arborist, so I can't tell what kind of tree that might have been from. Scale and size is very difficult. Even from this image, it's a little bit hard to tell. It's small. It's a very small waterfall, and it's right along the hiking trail. To take this picture, you're basically on the hiking trail. So anytime anyone was hiking by, I had to step aside, had to kind of shift things around a little bit to make sure they have room. This thing is great. So tulip blossoms in the spring, very photogenic in both, I would describe it as Oregon, but also Southern Washington State. So you just have to get up super early if you want to avoid people. Just get usually offer the farms that do this all the time, they make a lot of money from it. That's how they make their living. Just buy the photographer pass. That lets you get in before sunrise. That's what I always do here. This is a Wind Shoe in Oregon. And then Mount Hood, of course. So Mount Hood is super challenging. This is the best I've ever done. Not my favorite. It's the best I've ever done in Mount Hood. Always very challenging because it's a good haul. It's going to be a good haul from Portland. I always stayed in Portland because I'm working in Portland or like some metro area of Portland, but that's always a little bit farther away. There is a Lake Trillium Lake. That sounds familiar to my ear. So that's the one I would always go to if you want the sunrise pictures. I'd always go there for sunrise. Pretty straightforward. It will give you calmer water. It gives you a better chance to get something like this. But for me, always at Mount Hood, it was a little bit windier. So you get something like this. You're not going to get a super clear reflection if the water's not perfectly calm. But it's always, I've been there many times. It's like, it is what it is. You have to deal with the weather. So sometimes it's cooperative, sometimes it's not. Food scene, always do this, and I'm running out of time, so I talk about it very quickly. Mini donuts. So mini donuts. There's a very nice little Pips. It's a fun little mini donut shop in Portland itself. And then this is Painted Hills out in the middle of nowhere. So literally, this is literally a full day trip in Oregon out in the middle of nowhere. Once you get past the Cascade Mountains, you go to the east side, Oregon becomes very deserty. So this is part of region of Oregon. Not much rain, totally in the middle of nowhere, but looks super cool. Salt Lake City, super famous one. Of course, this is Main Temple. It's literally the first shot I ever used LM24 with. It let me use the close reflecting pool because there are two reflecting pools for along Temple property. I just went back super recent. It's totally under construction. There's no way. I don't even think this is up. This is not accessible. It's not up. I don't think there's water in this pool right now. And they're redoing the whole temple right now to improve earthquake resistance, enhancements for earthquake apparently. Different time of year, you can always do something different. So it's a good example if you live in Salt Lake City So when I'm down there, I'm pretty much staying at a hotel that's downtown if I'm working in Salt Lake City, and I'll just go there. If I have nothing else better to do, I'll just go down Temple Square to take different types of pictures from different types of point of view. Do that or do that. This is the other reflecting pool. Just mix it up. Um, it's a macro lens. It's weird. I know you don't have to use a macro lens. I could use a 200 millimeter telephoto. Basically, get the same picture anyways. Christmas lights. Okay, pretty straightforward. And then I went back and got this shot super recent because this is a very new lens. So RF 15 to 35. I'm surprised how good it was. I quite liked it. Classic picture of state capital of Utah, Salt Lake City. And then the inner rotunda. One of my favorite rotundas for sure would be the state of Utah. And then they don't make you walk through security actually to do it. So pretty relaxed there. It's all very cool. It's about 20 millimeter, a little bit 22, somewhere around low 20s gets you this kind of a framing. Pretty straightforward. And then finally, Seattle. The classic picture is pretty easy. And they always told me Kerry Park, very easy. Go to Kerry Park, you get this picture. So not too complicated. The complicated thing is just weather, if it's cooperative or not. It took me so many trips before one work trip. Finally got it. I'm super happy. You see Mount Rainier in the background. Most of the time, just because it looms very large, it actually does look big if you can actually see it from the city of Seattle. But because of the distance, a lot of clouds can get in the way. Because it's often very quite cloudy in Seattle, especially outside of summer season. So it can be very difficult to see Mount Rainier. Always the bucket list one. So if you don't know, right, I'll tell you right now, I'll give you the easy answer. So what focal length do you actually use to get more of this type of framing? You have to cut off the bottom because it's boring. It's just trees in a foreground residential neighborhood. Roughly 100 millimeter will get you this framing. And then at the base of Space Needle, you get something like this, just abstracts. Have fun before work. So literally, I was doing something before work because work started late, and I was like, I'm bored. I'm just sitting in the hotel anyways. I'll go down to Space Needle. I'll take some pictures because I know there are that's kind of like a copper cladding, just at the base of the Space Needle outside its museum. And then this is the best picture I've ever gotten at the Central Library, Public Library, downtown Seattle, because I've never been there when it's sunny. So if you ever are there when it's sunny, there's really some cool pictures outside you can take. So this is actually outside of the facade. There are other cool pictures that are not of this style outside on the facade you can take that are much cooler. If it's actually sunny, it's just not so easy to be there on a sunny day. And just mass transit. So I already knew, good example, that I planned to bring a tilt shift to do this one? Yes, I did. Because I knew this picture had to be taken from an elevated walkway. So you do it this way, or you take a super crazy wide lens and you start cropping to straighten things out. Pretty straightforward. And then I think literally I'm rushing the last picture. I promise that we'll finish on time. It's the most classic picture of something naturescape in Washington State, and that is the close-up shot of Mount Rainier from Reflection Lake. So the lake is actually named Reflection Lake, and they named it for this reason. And then it's just whatever the weather is. So if you're looking for more mirror reflection like this, so I was going for that, then it's more likely to be a morning shot. Although Mount Rainier, you can get golden hour view of Mount Rainier, both sunset and sunrise from Reflection Lake because you're facing north. And then you just get, this happens to be sunrise, pretty straightforward. And this is the alternate photo there. So looking to the east, super lucky. Broken clouds and a very pink orange sunrise. And that is it. My pacing is off today, but that's okay. Any questions? Don't know. Never know. There might be some questions.
Hey, Peter. So far, no major questions from anybody in the chat. We did have someone who did bring up the possibility of utilizing panoramic modes in camera, akin to maybe that one shot that you had at 24 mil that you wish you could have gotten a little bit wider as a potential suggestion from someone in the chat. But other than that, yeah, relatively straightforward. Great job.
It's hopefully a little bit more straightforward. The whole intention of this class was to not be so technical. It's more about, like, if you're there thinking not in the normal situation, thinking outside the box, and then be prepared for that. So a lot of the bucket list, like landscape photography locations, especially in a season where the photographers actually can get out, so away from tourist season, and then you see just mostly more serious enthusiast photographers and mixed in with some professionals. So many wide angle lenses, and it's like wow. it's the same picture from everyone. It's kind of boring, actually. I mean, you definitely get your bucket list picture, and sometimes it does require a wide lens, but I always suggest having something other than that because that'll give you a different framing. Mm, macro. I remember one trip where someone just used a macro lens the whole time because they'd been to Yosemite for so many times. It's like, good for you, because I think that's about basically what I would do at this point. It's just stick a macro lens on there. That's all I'm going to use. See you later, because that's all I'm going to use the whole trip. And that was good. And she got great pictures that are very creative. Yeah, because you did a little photo thing at the end of each day. And it's like, oh, she did a great job. She had a different point of view than everyone else. That's great. Okay.
Um, if I could interject a couple of my own questions while watching. I noticed that Google Maps is a pretty prominent in pointing out each location. Do you ever use other apps or websites like Photo Pills or Shade Map in preparation for shooting at different locations?
I have photo pills. I think it's a very popular. It doesn't cost that much. It's a good tool. It's pretty robust. It does have a lot of features. The most common reasons I would use it would be if you have some need to know positioning of near celestial objects that are prominent.
Mhm.
We know what they are. It's a good tool to have sometimes, especially for if you're pre-scouting. If you can be at a location, especially a day ahead of time, at least one day ahead of time, and do pre-scouting. So it'll give you a better idea, a more nuanced idea of composition of exactly where you might need to be. Because that can be very difficult on a tight timeline. So generally, if it's something where it involves the moon or the sun, my suggestion would be try to plan out to be there at least one day ahead of time,
Mhm.
at least 24 hours ahead of time to get a practice. So you have some idea of what's going to be happening at that location during some daylight hours. And then from there, you can use the app to give you a simulation of position of sun and moon at the optimal time of wherever you want to position it. Usually you're trying to position it relative to some other piece of geography. If it's urban, it'll usually be a building. This has become very common now. But if you're doing something like that, positioning becomes key because especially both the moon and the sun move We know this. They move rapidly in the sky. If you're not there at the right time of day, you're gonna have to fake it. I'd rather not fake it. None of mine are faked that are that way. Just make it the way it's supposed to be, and then you don't get any weird questions about why does that thing there at that time of day? It's not possible just geographically to be there at that time of day. It's the wrong time of day. So yes, so that'd be my most normal tool. Would be something like photo pills. It gives you at least some option to do it. There's some other tools you can get on a phone on a mobile, which can help you with that. So you don't have to get that one. There are a few others in that genre where you can get. The most useful thing to me is always geopositioning of sky. So
Mhm.
anything you have to have in the sky that's prominent. So moon and sun. Sorry, long answer. Sorry.
Oh, well, perfect, great. I'm also wondering, you met a couple of pictures you showed were off trail, when you were either walking from one place to the Javits Center or you were in a national park and walking along. What what takes you off trail? Like what is it that
Oh yes, okay.
takes you off of the beaten path?
Off the beaten path. I think it's easier once you are comfortable that you kind of checked off your bucket list things, right? I think for me, I always encourage people. I mean, some people get very snooty at it, but it's like, why take it? If you've never had taken the bucket list picture, go do it. You might as well have your own personal experience. Go do it because it's like you're putting yourself in the shoes of someone who did it the first time, like so long ago. That's great because they found it all on their own. You're kind of emulating them, especially just practicing, right? Especially practicing composition, which is the biggest thing with any kind of imaging is going to be composition. So what takes me off the trail is like it's like, hey, I've already got my bucket list things. I've already been here. It's like everyone's already over there. It's like, well, I'll walk away from them because maybe I'll see something they don't see. It doesn't have to be natural environment. It doesn't have to be landscape. It can be urban. It's like everyone else is there doing the one thing. It's like, I don't know. Maybe there's a different picture that I like that's different than when everyone else is seeing through the lens of their camera. That's what really takes me off trail is when it's like I'm more comfortable. I'm not as stressed out. It's like, oh, I'm missing bucket list opportunity, right? It's because it's like the sun needs to be this exact position. Otherwise, which is true sometimes in nature. It's like it needs to be that exact place, or the picture's not right. It's like this, like the arch picture, right? Yeah, you got to be there at the right time of day. So you got all these
True.
people camping before sunrise. It's ridiculous, right? It's like they're fighting for space. You're lining up to fight for the right spot. It's like great, whatever. It's like oftentimes I will just stay after. It's like, well, all the spots are taken. It's like, well, fine. It's like I'll wait till you're bored, you go away, and then I do whatever I want. I don't even care anymore. So I have a bunch of pictures like that too. It's like the ones where it's like, oh, everyone's bored, you're out of here, and it's like, okay, fine. It's after the quote unquote optimum time, but there's some other composition that might be interesting. It's just not the bucket list one, and that's okay too.
All right, cool. Well, Peter, Joey, thank you so much for joining us today. Also, a big thank you to Canon for hosting this. And really, the biggest thank you goes out to everyone watching. We hope you're getting the education and topics you're looking for. If you haven't already, come find us on YouTube to see all of our content. Just search for BH Event Space. Alrighty, again, thanks all around. This has been another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. Enjoy the rest of your day.